On a sweltering afternoon, as the sun scorched the thatched roofs of the village, a stranger appeared on the dusty path leading to the village. She wore nothing but a woven basket on her arm and a small raffia bag that contained her clothes. No companion, no greeting, just her shadow gliding silently over the red earth. Her name was Olga, and for all the years that the village of Abezo had existed, no one had ever seen a woman like her. She was beautiful, woven of mystery. The people were stunned. The men stared at her. The women whispered. She said only a few words upon her arrival, only that she needed a place to sleep. She chose the abandoned hut near the edge of the forest, a hut that had belonged to an old hunter who had disappeared one harvest season. No one had dared approach it before, but Olga settled there without fear, sweeping the floor with palm leaves and singing songs that no one recognized. Then she began to sell bananas in the village square. What followed could only be described as chaos. The men who lounged lazily in front of the palm wine bar suddenly remembered that they needed bananas. The boys who gathered would pass right in front of her stall. Even the two sons of the village chief, strong and proud men with wives and children, began to visit her under the pretext of market errands. Her stall overflowed with admirers every morning. The other women who sold tomatoes, onions, or okra complained bitterly. But how could she compete? Those bananas were no different from the others, but Olga made them look like golden offerings from a goddess. What none of them knew was that Olga was not who she seemed to be. She was never seen near mirrors. She never cast a glance at polished basins, never looked at herself in the stream where the others admired their reflections. In fact, every time a mirror was placed near her, by accident or malice, she turned away so quickly as if she feared being cursed. And she was afraid because in the mirror, her true form awaited. A form not made of beauty and bronze, but of shadow with eyes that glowed like burning coals and a face deformed by an ancient sadness. Only Olga knew what would happen if the people of Obasa saw her one day. But the men kept coming. They brought her gifts: goat meat, palm oil, yams. They prowled near her hut like bees around honey. At first, she resisted, telling them kindly but firmly to go back to their wives. But they did not listen. They said she was too beautiful to be alone, that she had been sent by the gods themselves, that even their dreams belonged to her now. The fall of the men of Obasa. Slowly, one by one, the affairs began. Husbands began to sleep outside at night, knocking softly at her door. Fathers began to lie to their children, saying they were going on hunting expeditions. Even respected elders began to lose their honor under the spell of her allure. The women of Abezo became bitter. Some threatened to confront her. Some spat when they heard her name, but no one dared approach her directly, for there was something in her eyes that was not quite human. There was something in the air of Obasa, something that no one could name. The palm wine still flowed at the bar, but the men of the village had changed. They walked with veiled eyes, laughed without joy, and shouted at the slightest provocation from their wives. Their wives, who once wore colorful wraps and sang, now walked with heads bowed and in bitter silence. The children looked on in confusion as their once loving fathers became angry and strange. And at the heart of it all stood Olga, calm and spared by the storms she had herself engendered. She did not flinch when the women whispered behind her back. She did not respond to accusations or rumors. She simply adjusted her wrap, picked up her basket of bananas, and smiled with that enchanting calm that made even her silence oppressive. But the women saw the truth in their midst. The men who once trembled at the thought of raising a hand to their wives now behaved like beasts. They came home smelling of banana pots and the sweat of a perfume that was not that of their spouses. Among all the women who thought their hearts broken, one stood out. Audi was not a simple villager. She was the kind of girl who danced like a melody, whose laughter brought peace even to the sea in mourning. Everyone in Abezo knew her love story with Emain. How they had grown up together, fetching water at the stream, sharing mangoes in the bush. When he finally married her, the whole village danced. They were the envy of many. So when he too began to frequent Olga's hut, the village held its breath. Even the elders whispered, "If Olga can take Emin, No one is safe in this village. Audi said nothing at first. She cried into her wrap at night, her heart crumbling like dried yam flour. She had known Emin forever. Every scar on his hand, every rhythm of his heart. This new man, the one who came home late with that strange look, was not the Emin she had married. Something was wrong, and she could not wait for the gods to fix it. So Audi began to watch. She stopped cooking in the morning. Instead, she covered her head with a simple scarf, smeared charcoal under her eyes like a hunter, and hid behind trees and bushes. She followed the movements of Olga, from her banana stall to the stream path, from the village square to the abandoned hut. Audi kept her distance, but never lost sight of her. She watched the men come and go, one day with wood, the next with a basket of snails. She saw Olga accept each gift with a smile, but never with thanks. The men left her place staggering like drunks, their eyes glassy and their hearts beating like untuned drums. But the most frightening thing was that Olga was never afraid. She lived as if she were beyond all consequence. And that was when Audi realized it was not an ordinary woman. But in the midst of it all, Audi could not find anything tangible against Olga. It was a quiet afternoon in Abezo. Olga, wrapped in her usual blue wrap, crossed the village square with her basket of bananas on her head. As always, heads turned, men stopped mid-conversation, boys dropped their slingshots, and even the breeze seemed to whisper in her presence. But fate had something different in store that day. A little boy, no more than 5 years old, was playing near the fruit stall, giggling as he held a shiny metal mirror that his mother had brought back from a traveling merchant. He waved it under the sun, catching the light and scattering it playfully around the market. Then, just as Olga passed by, his hand tilted the mirror and it caught her face. For the first time, the village heard Olga scream. A piercing and inhuman cry escaped her lips. She dropped her basket. The bananas fell to the earth scattered, and she covered her face, stumbling backward. The little boy froze. He looked in the mirror again, and what he saw was not the face of the beautiful woman everyone adored. What he saw was something twisted, ancient, and monstrous. His little hand trembled. The mirror fell. He screamed and started running. His mother caught him panicked, but he struggled like a possessed child, pointing at Olga and shouting, "She is not real. She is not real." The market fell into a stone silence. The women began to murmur. What did that boy see? Why did Olga scream? Why does she never look in mirrors? Suspicion, once buried under jealousy, rose like smoke. But that was not the worst. A few days later, Abezo sank into madness. The men, once drunk on lust, began to fight openly. Fists flew in the village square. Spears were thrown in front of the shrines. Grown men, fathers, elders, married husbands were no longer themselves. They quarreled over who Olga truly belonged to, who had her heart, to whom she whispered in the deepest night. Some tore their clothes, others cried like children, still others shouted her name like lost souls. Olga watched them always as calm, her eyes as cold and empty as a moonless night. The women of Abezo wept, their homes broken, their sons corrupted, their marriages destroyed. It was at that moment that Audi, the one whose heart bled the most, stood up and said to the women, "We cannot sit and die. We must fight this spirit with the truth." The prophecy of the Dibia. They gathered. The women of Abezo, dressed in mourning wraps, carrying gourds of kola nuts, palm wine, and bitter leaves, marched beyond the hills and rivers to the cave of Dibia, the seer of the 7 kingdoms. He sat cross-legged behind a fire. His hair was white as cotton, his eyes veiled by ancestral wisdom. When they told him the reason for their coming, Audi did not answer. Instead, he laughed. A deep and resounding laugh that sent birds flying from the trees. The women exchanged frightened looks. Audi clenched her jaw. "What is so funny, great sage?" she asked. Audi looked at her and said, "You come seeking the remedy, but you do not yet understand the cause." Then, in a voice that made the leaves on the trees tremble, he revealed the truth to them. "Olga was once one of you, not just a woman, but the purest among you," he told them. She was born with a rare mark on her face that the gods had placed to test the heart of humanity. But you betrayed her. The men turned away with grimaces when she passed. The women mocked her beauty. No one wanted to marry her. And then one night, someone entered her hut and abused her. She knew him. She denounced him, but he spat in her face and lied. And the village believed him, not her. She carried his child in shame, and one night, she went into the forbidden forest where no mortal dares venture. There, she offered her life and the life of her unborn child to a dark spirit in exchange for vengeance and beauty. She asked to be adored, venerated, and remembered. And the spirit granted her wish, but at a price. The Olga you see now is just a shell. Her soul is gone. The woman is no more. What walks in your village is the spirit of destruction wearing the skin of a broken girl. The women wept, even the oldest, even the most bitter. Pity crept into their hearts. But Ojah raised his hand and told them, "Do not weep for her. She chose the darkness. She made her vow. Now, she is a well that drinks the hearts of men and spits out dust. If you want to stop her, you must be ready to face not her beauty, but her truth." The fire in Dibia's cave had reduced to glowing embers when he spoke again. "She has done this before," he said softly, almost to himself. "Olga goes from village to village, leaving behind desolation where love once lived. Her vengeance is not blind. It is deliberate. She feeds on the guilt of unfaithful men. Her victims are always the same. Husbands who cheat, fathers who lie, men whose words are sweeter than their spirit." The women lowered their eyes stinging with shame and guilt. Their husbands had invited this curse into their homes. Their greed, their wandering hands, and their hungry eyes had awakened destruction. "How can we stop her?" Audi whispered. "The mirror of truth." Audi stared at the smoke for a long moment before answering. Then, with a deep breath, he reached behind his shrine and pulled out a long, narrow object wrapped in white cloth. A mirror, but not an ordinary mirror. He unwrapped it slowly, and the firelight flickered on the glass. He murmured into the mirror, his voice low and trembling with power. The holy glass shimmered faintly, as if it had come alive. "This mirror holds the power to lift illusions," he said, handing it to Audi. "If Olga looks into it, even for an instant, her true form will appear. But be warned, you must act immediately. Once she is unmasked, follow everything I have told you. No hesitation. If you fail, you may not survive to try again." They bowed deeply, thanking him with offerings, kola nuts, and a spotless white hen that they placed at his feet. Then they turned, carrying the enchanted mirror like a sacred object, and began their journey back to Abezo. Meanwhile, in Abezo, the sun had not yet risen when the cries began. The villagers ran to the square, clutching wraps and lanterns. The children cried. The women covered their mouths in horror. On the red earth of the village square lay the lifeless bodies of 3 men. Their eyes were open, their faces twisted in an expression of terror. Their fingers were curled inward as if clutching invisible ropes that pulled them to the beyond. The priest was called, the chief was summoned, prayers were sung, libations poured, but no one could explain what had happened, except the women. They knew Olga had claimed them. They were all known to be unfaithful men. Each had visited her hut. Each had abandoned his wife's bed for her intoxicating beauty. The news spread like wildfire. And yet, Olga was untouched. She crossed the square later that morning, as calm as a river in the dry season. Her head was high, her banana basket balanced on her head with effortless grace. Not even the bodies of her victims stopped her. Her beauty shone brighter than ever, as if she fed on the chaos around her. The women watched her pass. They clenched their fists. The absence of Audi and the other women was painful like a wound. They had not yet returned from their journey, and time was pressing. The air of Abezo was heavy with fear. The drums were silent. The pots no longer cooked, and the spirit of destruction continued to walk among them, wearing the face of a goddess. On the morning of the 7th day, Abezo was no longer a village. It was the shadow of itself. 7 men were dead, 7 fathers, 7 husbands, 7 souls that had come too close to the flame. No one dared sleep. The market was empty. The drums had fallen silent. The children clung to their mothers, and even the pots refused to sing. Then, just as the sun rose over the hills and bathed the earth in golden light, Audi and the women returned. They arrived like warriors, faces weary, eyes sharp, their steps sure, wrapped in white and ash. They moved quietly through the village without attracting attention. They carried the enchanted mirror wrapped in white cloth as the Dibia had ordered. That morning, she did not cry, they acted. In the center of the market square, where she often passed, the women placed the mirror vertically on a carved wooden stand. They covered it once more with white cloth and poured drops of palm oil all around, forming a sacred circle. The air was heavy, the trap was set. A few minutes later, she arrived. Olga's wrap was red that day, the color of fire and blood. Her basket was balanced as always. Her gait as graceful as a leaf carried by the wind. She had not aged a second. On the contrary, she was more radiant, more terrifying in her beauty. The villagers watched her from behind shops and doors. Some held their breath, others clutched their hearts. Olga approached the market square. Then, just as she passed in front of the mirror, someone called her by name Olga. She turned at that precise instant. The cloth was removed from the mirror. The mirror looked at her motionless and waiting. Olga's eyes met her reflection, and the earth seemed to stop turning. She let out a cry, a sound that was not that of a woman or a human being, but of something ancient, twisted and filled with agony. The whole village saw it. They all saw the reflection in the mirror. It was no longer the beautiful woman they knew. What stood in the glass was a dark entity, twisted and burned. Its eyes were like wells of black fire. Its mouth was stretched in an eternal scream. And then the mirror pulled her in. Her body wavered, twisted and disappeared, sucked into the glass like smoke into a pot. She was trapped. Audi acted quickly. She knelt before the mirror and broke the sacred egg that Dibia had given them. A great wind rose. Then, in a single voice, they lifted the mirror and shattered it on the ground. A blinding light burst from the shards, then silence. No more birds, no more wind, no more cries, just peace. For the first time in weeks, the air was calm, the sun warm, the earth no longer burned, the ground no longer seemed heavy. The spirit was gone. Olga was never seen again, and in her place a lesson remained. The men of Abezo wept not only out of fear but out of shame. They went to their wives on their knees barefoot, and with broken words. They asked for forgiveness. Some fasted. Some built shrines in their homes to honor loyalty. All had learned a terrible truth. When a man breaks his vows, he opens a door, and not all the entities that cross it are women of flesh and blood. Thus, the story of Olga, the woman who never looked in mirrors, the spirit that punished unfaithful men, was told from mouth to ear, from generation to generation. The children gathered around the fires to hear how beauty can hide destruction and how the mirror, though silent, never lies. And every time a stranger entered, the women watched her closely, not with hate, but in remembrance.